Well, good evening. I'm Bruce Hawley, president of the Circus Historical Society, and welcome to our Circus History Live program in celebration of World Circus Day with our special guest tonight, Paul Binder. And now here's your host, Chris Berry, vice president of the Circus Historical Society. Chris?
Thank you, Bruce. As our friend, the late Ernie Albrecht, circus historian, once said, he's a juggler, a clown, a director, a fundraiser, a role model, an energizer. He's a creative force, a guru, a high priest, a miracle worker, and a visionary. And he once called himself the pole around which everything is focused. I call him one of the greatest circus impresarios of the late 20th century. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Paul Binder.
Good evening, everybody. Nice to see all of you. I don't see all of you yet, but come on in.
So Paul, I appreciate you joining us, especially on World History Day 2022, an opportunity to take a look at really the Big Apple Circus, the experiences that you had with the Big Apple Circus as co-founder, and then also really, where you think the circus is going today. You and I have talked on a number of occasions about this, and you're always very insightful about where circus has come from. But in 1975, you made a decision to basically take the circus back to its roots, right?
I think that's a fair estimate. I decided that in the great tradition was the solution for the new audience. And I was a cultural history major in college. So a lot of the issues of the history added up to what would be the great vision of the circus. And I had the incredible good fortune to work in the circus in France and tour a big tour of France. One town after the next, and lots of French people came to our circus. I worked with Annie Fratellini, who was the 6th generation of her family to be a circus clown, and Pierre Tex, her husband, who, in addition to being a white clown, was a wonderful filmmaker in France. Great experience.
So let's kind of talk about your interest in, you grew up in New York City. I know you used to go into Manhattan to see Broadway shows and things like that, but you were like a history major when you went to Dartmouth. You went on to get your MBA at Columbia University. How does an MBA become a mime?
Well, I stumbled one thing into the next, Chris, but it all fit together. It all worked for me. It was my earliest experience that I recall that led me to where led me to the Big Apple Circus was my parents taking me to see. Come on, who played the Scarecrow in the Wizard of Oz?
Well, were you talking about Bert Lahr, or were you talking about the Scarecrow, which was the dancer? Maybe somebody else can help us.
Ray Bolger.
Ray Bolger, yeah.
Ray Bolger was in a Broadway musical called Where's Charlie, in which he played Charlie. It came from a Broadway play called Charlie's Aunt. He played Charlie's aunt as well. She was Charlie's aunt from Brazil, where the nuts come from. And he played both parts. And somewhere in the middle of the second half of the show, he sang and he danced. He was an incredible self-taught dancer. And he came to the front of the stage and he asked the audience to join him in the song he was singing, which was Once in Love with Amy.
Oh, yeah.
And I sat there just thrilled, singing along with Ray Bolger. And I am sure that was the moment that I said, this is all I ever want to do for the rest of my life. Make people sing and dance and be happy. And we were just, the whole audience was clearly happy doing this with Ray Bolger. So that was an early experience that definitely imprinted that I wanted to be in show business. And Lord knows that's what happened.
So you moved to San Francisco, you hook up with some mimes out there, and then ultimately you make your way to Europe, where you were miming and then joined a circus, right?
Yeah, it was the San Francisco Mime Troupe. Wasn't, mime as we think of it as, silent comedy. In fact, we did commedia dell'arte style plays in an outdoor raked stage in the parks in and around the Bay Area. And we made our living passing the hat. I remember Joan Mankins' routine. Joan Mankin was one of the company members, and she said, well, everybody, if you liked what you saw, put something in the hat. And if you didn't like what you saw, put something in the hat. And we passed the hat. That's how we made our living. Although we did tour to various colleges and universities. But
And
it was, yeah.
One of the members in that troupe was Michael Christensen too.
Oh
who you
yeah,
had
oh yeah,
a long
definitely.
relationship with.
Yeah, a wonderful actor, comedy actor, who had been trained at a actor training course, University of Washington. Grew up in Washington and was a wonderful actor, always clever comedian. So it was a great partnership we had.
So you heard that he was going to Europe, and you hooked up with him, and you went over to
Yeah, well, he was supposed to go to Europe with Larry Pizzoni. Larry Pizzoni was the founder of Pickle Family Circus.
Oh, yes.
And he married Peggy. Peggy. He married Peggy, whose name I'm now blanking on, who was a graduate of Bennington College, an artist and an actress. And Michael went off ahead to Europe. He was working at a farm in Kent, England, and Larry was supposed to join him there. Well, that was a good idea to everybody but Larry's wife, who said that wasn't their idea of what was going to be a marriage. So Michael sent me a telegram asking me to come join him in England, and that's where we started our partnership.
So while you're over there, you get to see probably for the first time a one-ring circus, right?
Oh yeah, indeed. And we started as street performers, remember. So the first place we went to in London was Carnaby Street. And we passed the hat there. And then we noticed that there were big crowds that formed at, Hyde Park Corner.
Speaker's Corner, yeah, Petticoat Lane.
Yes, Speaker's Corner. And there were crowds. And people would get up on little pedestals and harangue the crowd. That was, it was free speech time in Hyde Park Corner. Well, we were there one day and we did a whole show, and we passed the hat. And somewhere toward the end of our passing of the hat, a London Bobby walked up in full uniform, and he said to us, "Gentlemen, would you mind stepping aside for a moment while I explain a few fine points of the ancient British law?" And he informed us that soliciting on the Queen's property was strictly not allowed. So that
you weren't a licensed busker, right?
That's correct. That's correct. Although we were in other places, but that was later on. But that was our first experience passing the hat in London, and then from London we went across the channel to France, and that's where our true partnership began.
So you're at the Casino de Paris, and some folks come and see your act.
Now I'm trying to put things in order, but the Casino de Paris was a music hall. Excuse me, everybody who's on this, is what they called a tits and feathers show. And it was danseuses nude dancers, right? Well, they weren't exactly nude, but with big feathers and feathered headdresses, and very elaborate, very wonderful, and we were what they called I forget what they get, but we were a feature. So the curtains would close on a King Kong statue, which had just been used as a backdrop, and then we would step in front of the curtain and do our act in one, is what it was called.
And I think while you were there, Paul, that's when some folks from the French National Circus School. This is all this foundation for the Big Apple Circus.
Yep.
We saw you perform, and suddenly you're in the circus business.
Actually, the exact story is they saw us on TV. There was a national broadcast on French television of our act from the Casino de Paris, and we had a great fun doing that work on that stage. We worked in front of the orchestra pit, and one day one of the clubs bounced and fell into the pit,
Wow.
And the musicians passed it up to us. So we took it. We said, well, oh, wait a
Juggling
minute.
club. Yeah.
Yes, a juggling. We understood that this was something very special, that we could include the pit musicians in our act. So we went out that evening or the next morning to the Marché aux Puces, which is the flea market. It was a huge flea market on the outskirts of Paris. And we bought a old, used, ratty violin and reinforced it so that it could be juggled. And the next time we dropped the club in, we'd reach down and pull out the violin and then start juggling with the violin. It was a natural. And what we learned was that the musicians in the pit were having as good a time as we were doing that sort of thing with us.
But this, going back to the French National Circus School and Annie Fratellini,
Yeah.
I mean, she was really very instrumental in sort of creating this vision for the Big Apple Circus, right?
Absolutely. She had a small circus, the Nouveau Cirque de Paris, the New Circus of Paris, and she and her husband Pierre Tex were the clowns in that show. She was the sixth generation of her family, an Italian circus family, to be a circus clown. And she was marvelous. I mean, she just had this quality, this incredibly generous quality, about kind of simple-minded clown quality about her. And she was our true mentor.
So this is, and for those of you on the call here, so this is about 1974 or so. You come back to the United States, you've got this crazy idea that you want to have a circus school and a circus. How do you start something like that? I mean, you've got a little bit of the business background, but finding acts and figuring out the funding and the fact that it became a nonprofit and things like that.
Yeah, we learned early on that it had to be a not-for-profit, that there was no way that ticket prices could support the finest circus acts we could find in the world. Many of which I'd seen in not just Paris, but in Europe, and always looking for the best of the genre, whether it was juggling or acrobatics or apparatus work or aerial work. We were always looking for the best acts, and we were very fortunate that we would always see something and say, oh my gosh, look at this. If we put this in the right frame in this intimate circus, at one ring, circus, this could be a spectacular success. And so it was. I mean, that's how it grew.
But still, those of us who know you know that you're a very tenacious individual. And, I mentioned earlier, you have this master's in business administration from Columbia University that had to help when you were out there, trying to solicit money. And when you met one of your biggest supporters, Alan Slifka.
Slifka, yes. Slifka said to me, he came to a presentation we did in a loft in Soho. Friend had a loft space, and we decided to see if we could introduce what we were planning to do. And he came to that, and he simply said to me, I missed the 60s. This was the early 70s, that he somehow missed the excitement of the 1960s, and that he wanted to give something, give back something. He was a relatively wealthy man even then, but he grew his wealth at leaps and bounds after that. Anyway, and just he fell in love with the circus. He came every year to the Monte Carlo Circus Festival. He just loved what we were doing. And at the same time, we were putting forward what became known as social circus, putting forth that we wanted to create a circus that would give back to the community. And what was created was a series of programs, community programs that were funded and by philanthropists and foundations and government and so on. The largest of which was the clown care unit, which was clowns in the hospitals. If I remember correctly, there were a lot of New York hospitals, but then we began branching out all over the country, and it was a wonderful program. I mean, because it was a win-win across the board. The nurses, and doctors in the hospitals would benefit by it. The patients in the hospital, kids, would benefit by it. And it just became a wonderful series of programming. I see one of the people on the call. Wait a minute, where is she? Oh, hi, Vanessa. I see you, Vanessa.
Vanessa Smith.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gosh, I'm looking through.
I'm gonna
yeah.
bring some of these folks in a little later on with their
Oh, good.
recollections. You know, this is your life, Paul Binder kind of discussion, not just the Hollywood squares. But when you take a look at, you know, when you think back on those early days, you know, 1975, 1976, acquiring the tent, getting the funding, finding the acts. I mean, you know, now when you go down to Battery Park City, it's one of the most highly developed parts of lower Manhattan. But when you set up your tent down there, it was basically a landfill, right?
Yeah, it was a landfill. In fact, I, for years, had a rash that I picked up in that land. Some kind of critter decided to live on the Hotel Me. And it was on my arm for years and years and years. But it was a landfill. So, but it was amazing to be down there. I mean, it was a plot. I don't even know who owned the property, Chris, but we just said we can put
I
a.
think it was owned by the Port Authority. I think it still is,
Oh,
actually.
yes, that
Yeah.
makes sense. And
But
we felt we could put a big top up there and attract a crowd. I mean, it was very visible from the West Side Highway, and it was right down on the tip of Manhattan. It worked. I don't know how it worked, but it worked.
so you get this thing out there, you're, you know, it's starting to get a little bit of traction, you're getting some publicity, you now get into Lincoln Center. And I think that a lot of people on this call are familiar with Jerome Robbins, who was one of the great choreographers on Broadway. I know he was someone who was also sort of a rabbi to you and helped you out with this too.
Well, the story, this is an anecdote I must tell. We were setting up our big top in Lincoln Center with New York City Ballet on one side of us, the Metropolitan Opera on the other. And I decided to go out and get some fresh air at the Lincoln Center fountain. And I was standing there, and a bearded fellow came walking up to me. And I said, oh my God, that's Jerome Robbins. Jerome Robbins was the ballet master of the New York City Ballet, had choreographed West Side Story, had choreographed Fiddler on the Roof, King and I. And there he came walking up to me and he said, Paul, you're going to have a flying act in this year's show? I said, well, yes, we're going to have the Flying Guyonas like last year. And he said, oh, wonderful, good. I'm going over to the theater coffee shop to have a little lunch. You want to join me? And I said, I'm screaming inside going, would I? You know, oh, why, yes, I would be happy to do that, I said. And so we went off and had our eggs and hash browns. And this was a seminal moment. He said to me, well, are you guys funded by the New York State Council on the Arts? And I said, well, in our first year, they funded us. The theater division of the New York State Council on Arts gave us money because they thought they felt we were very interesting new theater. And I said, but now this is our third season. And they've decided that we're not theater, so they're not giving us any money. And this is a quote. He said, the fools, don't they know that you are the original theater? You're the form out of which all of the rest of us grew. Without the circus form, none of the performing arts would exist. That was and I looked at him.
And I think that's worth restating too, that, you know, what Jerome Robbins, one of the greats of the American theater, said, no circus, no theater, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah,
that's basically
all of the performing arts was his statement, grew out of what you're doing. And I looked at them and I said, Mr. Robbins, I think I called him Mr. Robbins. Later he became Jerry. But Mr. Robbins, would you be willing to write a letter to that effect to the state council? And he did, and they restored our funding.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
You know, when you take a look, another thing that we've talked about in the past is the importance of when you won that Off-Broadway award, the Obie Award. That kind of legitimized you in many ways, right?
Yes, yes. The Obie was, of course, the word for Obie, Off-Broadway. And we won the Obie Award that year. I'm not sure which year it was. We were out in Queens on Cunningham Park in Queens because we did all the boroughs. That was part of our arrangement with the city, with the Department of Cultural Affairs. And so Jim Russick, who was our advertising man, our advertising agent, our executive advertising executive, went to receive the award on our behalf. And he said, Paul Binder wants you to know that he truly believes in off-Broadway. Tonight, he's in Cunningham Park in Queens, which is about as off-Broadway as you can get.
Yes, it
So,
is.
and he accepted the award on our behalf.
That is funny. Let's talk a little bit about the fact that you did, obviously from the very beginning, you were going out into the boroughs. You weren't just in Manhattan, and you were also going into the schools, right?
Yeah, we were doing auditions in the schools to find young, talented kids who could eventually be trained in the circus arts. We had a school that the teachers of which were two Russian emigres, the Moscow Circus performers, both, by the way, clowns, Gregory Fedin and Nina Krasavina or Krasavina, and we set up in a loft. It was actually a storefront space in Soho before Soho became, the most popular piece of real estate in New York. And in that space, they began training young kids in circus arts. Jessica Hentoff, who was Nat Hentoff, started. Nat Hentoff was the jazz critic for the Village Voice for many, many years. Jessie is Circus Harmony in St. Louis. That was Nat's daughter. She's still doing that work. She helped us. She made that idea work. The notion that we were training young people and going into schools and auditioning them, and several kids in those schools became wonderful international circus artists.
And people think of a youth circus or a school circus as being, amateurs, but the Big Apple Circus was anything but amateur. How do you find the acts, the great act? I mean, when you take a look at the Big Apple Circus, especially, in the 80s and 90s, you had the greatest circus acts in the world there. How do you find them? How do you get them to come to work for this one-ring circus?
Well, I start by saying we were in New York, which was a wonderful magnet for artists. The whole notion of doing a season in New York City was a real magnet for them. But I would go to Europe each year. There were festivals in Paris, the Festival de Demain, the Festival of Tomorrow, which was for artists 25 years old and younger, and the Great Monte Carlo Circus Festival, which Prince Renier was the, what would you call him? He was the head of the jury, and he loved circus. He absolutely loved circus. I had many stories because I sat with him at the jury table every morning, every evening, and every morning going through the acts. But I had, what emerged was I had connections to all the directors in Europe. They knew we had a circus in New York. They heard it was wonderful or saw video of it, and they were always helpful so that I could pick up the phone and for a lot of Swiss francs call Freddie Knie Jr. in Switzerland and say, hey, I got a video from such and such an act. They look very good. What do you think? And he would tell me, whether they were good citizens or not, and so on. And it was just a wonderful connection amongst all the directors.
I mentioned at the very beginning of this about, up until 1975, really, I mean, this was before Cirque du Soleil. Yeah, there were maybe a few one-ring circuses around, but for the most part, the American public was familiar with Ringling's Big Three-Ring Circus, Beatty Cole, Karsten Barnes, even with the 5 rings for a time. This idea of the intimate one-ring circus, what did that, you brought in big names, Dolly Jacobs, who had been on Ringling, the Flying Guyonas. So what was it like for them when they suddenly were in this intimate act? They're only, 100 feet from the audience.
So let's tell it as an anecdote. Dolly came to us. She had never worked in a small, intimate environment. As you know, she was spectacular all the time. The first thing I had to tell her was, Dolly, you've got to temper down your makeup. You don't need eyelashes this long. You don't need all that pancake and so on. I said, give us more of your natural self, your natural beauty. I mean, she's always been a beauty. And she learned very fast. And she learned also, and this was much more difficult because what Dolly was doing physically was very precise. She had to be very precise and very focused. And she hadn't been trained in the ability to make contact with the audience. I mean, there they were, 40 feet from where she was working, up in the air, of course. But I, slowly, I had to sort of introduce. I said, "They're right there, Dolly. All you got to do is give them a small smile, and they will appreciate, what you're doing that much more." By the way, a lesson for every circus performer in the intimate environment. Just let them know how much pleasure it's giving you, and they'll give it back. But that was an example. She was a big international circus star.
So,
I remember,
speaking of big stars, you were not only the co-founder and the guy who was, pulling all the strings, but you had directors and producers that you worked with also, but you were the ringmaster. So, can you give me an announcement, maybe like for Tito Gaiona and his triple?
Oh, let me see if I can recall. Ladies and gentlemen, what you're about to see, oh no, the standard of excellence on the flying trapeze is the triple somersault. What you are about to see is an attempt at 3 turns in the air to the hands of the catcher, something to that effect, but always very low key. Don't oversell was the basic plan. Just tell them what's going to happen. They'll see it. The audience, well, one of our key phrases in those days was the audience sees everything. You can't hide from them. You can't pretend for them. They're going to see it. So say what it is, open the door, let them walk through, and bing, bang, boom. I think one of the Gaionas is on this call. I think
Richie was going to be joining us. Yeah.
Yeah, good.
And so let's talk about a little bit. What was the line you just said, that people see everything, right?
The audience sees everything. That's a standing rule.
When I think of a more of a traditional circus, there's a lot of stuff that's going on with props being moved and things like that. In this intimate one ring environment, you had to keep the attention of the audience while nets were being put up for the Gaionas, while Dolly Jacobs rings were being placed. You did that through clowns. I'd like to talk a little bit about some of those great clowns that you have on the show.
We had wonderful clowns. Michael Christensen himself was a wonderful clown. Barry Lubin, Grandma, was a wonderful clown and a big favorite of the audience.
And you were a clown at one time.
Briefly. We did a show with the Boston Pops. So we had an 80-piece orchestra in the center section of our bleachers. And we did a show with them, all live, 40 violins. Dolly is swinging through the air, and you see 40 violinists going like this. And they loved doing it. But I've lost my track. But the point was
the clowns. Well, let's talk about those clowns. I think that, and you talked about the makeup of performers in the big, Madison Square Garden type of environment, and then you have this little environment. Clowns, I think, were the same thing. I mean, your clowns didn't have the grotesque makeup. They were very approachable and very much a part of the show too. Whether it was Barry Lubin or any of the other great clowns.
Yeah. Jeff Gordon, of course, was a wonderful clown. Gordon the clown. I just spoke to him this past week. He's out of show business and he's into selling antiques in Pittsburgh, which is his hometown. But he was a wonderful clown, a silent clown. Occasionally he had words, like the time he ended up on top of the rigging of the flying trapeze, literally at the top of the tent, screaming. Because he'd been hauled up there by mistake.
Oh,
yeah. But he was a wonderful clown, very sympathetic, very what I should say, he's very human characters. They were not masked. That you could see their humanity and their joy and their love coming through the mask they were wearing. The makeup.
The other thing that I think I'd like to talk a little bit. And by the way, we are going to take your calls for Paul. Your sounds like a radio show. We're going to take your comments or questions for Paul shortly here. But I wanted to talk a little bit about animals in the circus. You had obviously, Buckles Woodcock and Benny Williams, the great anime was in the circus. You had a lot of horse acts in the show. But you were very proactive in the period before really the animal activists really got a foothold in kind of being proactive and talking to them and getting, animal behavior experts who had been vetted by the SPCA. I mean,
Mhm.
tell me a little bit about the whole issue of animals in the circus, how you were able to sort of preempt a lot of that, and then kind of what's the future for
Well,
animals?
certainly we did preempt it. We had and always had testimonials from experts, animal experts. There was one woman who was from Scotland. I'm blanking on her name now, but she was a known expert in the UK, and she had done a whole study of the treatment of animals in the circus in the UK, and came clearly out on the side of the humanity of the trainers of those animals. We had elephants, we had horses, we had dogs, an occasional llama, an ostrich that Susanna Svensson actually rode around the ring, but always with, how shall I say, with the sense of humanity about the treatment of the animals. Um, but the animal welfare people understood. The people who became the animal rights people had a political agenda that, it was just misinforming the audience in general. But we always had the backing of experts. This is, these animals are being treated well and humanely and with great care. So that was very important for us. And it was a statement about the handling and the relationship between humans and animals, which to this day I say is very important if this planet of ours is to survive.
And by the way, Heidi Harriet, thank you. It was Martha Kiley Worthington of Edinburgh.
Oh yeah, that's right. Martha Kiley Worthington
So
was
thanks, Heidi, for that. And I know,
the
Heidi, you've got some
Scottish
other things
lady.
you want
Yeah,
to talk about too. We'll
yeah.
get to you. So when you made the decision to kind of take the show on the road, literally, and leave the 5 boroughs of Manhattan, of New York City, and move out, you would typically open the show in Reston, Virginia. It was kind of like an off-Broadway tryout, right?
Yeah, we always had a great audience because that area of Northern Virginia had a lot of young families with children. It was a natural for us. They would come and Bert Lahr's son, John Lahr, asked his father, the Cowardly Lion, "How do you know what's funny, Dad?" And he said, "I listen to the audience." And that's the great example. They were an audience that we could learn from, and we always did in Reston. And that was the show that we would bring to Lincoln Center each year. We would make some changes, we would make some adjustments, and so on. But that was the show we would bring to Lincoln Center each year. But it was a great place to do a tryout, an out-of-town tryout.
And I think that, a lot of people talked about the fact that at your winter quarters, even before you would open the show, you kind of got everybody together and created this sense of community and family, right?
Yeah, we had two different levels of performer. We had core company members who were generalists who had a lot of different things they could do, and they would train specific acts for each show. Very talented people. And then we had guest artists, the best we could find in the world. And it was really the job of the core company members to acclimate the guest artists. This is how we go about doing things here. This is how we think. This is how we approach the work. This is how we deal with the audience, and so on and so on. And that was a very valuable way of going about our work. We would gather. We had a production headquarters in Walden, New York, upstate, and we built it out, and we'd all go there and begin putting the shows together there. It was a great way to work.
So, you start taking the show on the road. Places like Reston, Boston was another place where you went year after year after year. but you kind of left your comfort zone in some ways of leaving Manhattan when you went to places like Philadelphia or Chicago, even when you took the show out there. Um, how difficult was it to kind of go into these new cities? Because in the case of both of those, Philadelphia, I think you were only there twice,
Yep.
and Chicago, I think you were only there once.
Oh, we were there once, and we were right outside the Arlington Park
Actually,
racetrack.
you were there twice. You're right. You were there at
Oh,
you were at Soldier Field on the parking
yeah,
lot, and you were
yes,
also at Arlington Park.
yes. Arlington Park was fun because you could hear the starting gate go off on the racetrack in the middle of our show, and they're off. It was like, but again, it was a great place because there was a wonderful, diverse audience out there. Same thing with Soldier Field was a whole other experience. But oh yeah, David Carlion is saying we went to Detroit. That's that was about as far as we got from New York. We were not in a comfortable, and we had no name recognition there. In Boston, we had name recognition. We were, an East Coast phenomenon, theatrical phenomenon. So going to Boston each year was always thrilling. And we arrived in Boston right near the beginning of April. So we were seen as a harbinger of spring. The Big Apple Circus brought spring to the cold, windy harbor town, Um,
So we talked a little bit about, this is your life. I'm going to ask Bruce Hawley, who's pulled some photographs, which our friend Paul Guthel actually took. For those of you who don't know Paul is probably one of the best circus photographers of our generation. And Paul, it's good to see you on this call. So obviously this is Mr. Paul, and they always referred to you as Mr. Paul, right?
that was my character. The ringmaster was Mr. Paul, and others who wore formal clothes were Mr. The clowns weren't. You see, they were just disruptors.
And that may go back to the old French, equestrian director day, Mr. Loyal.
Yeah,
Also.
absolutely, Chris. So this first photograph is Lincoln Center. You can see right there, the building behind the big top is the Metropolitan Opera. And this is 62nd Street, West 62nd Street.
So for those who haven't actually seen it, yeah, I mean, this is like the heart of the Upper West Side here, such an important place. It's a long way from Battery Park landfill.
Yeah, and this is the Metropolitan Opera. The arrow is pointing. What's the next photo, please?
Now you also, before we move on, and you also, the show also appeared actually at another historic circus site one time on 8th Avenue. I think it might have even been the first time you were out. And that was the location of the old Madison Square Garden between 49th Street and 50th Street.
Yes,
they had torn down the old garden, and it the vacant lot sat there for years. And you actually, the Big Apple Circus was the last circus to play 8th Avenue between 49th and 50th Street.
Yeah, it had been turned into a parking lot. And we inhabited it with our floppy little green canvas tent.
And so much circus history there. Okay, I see
photo,
a couple
this photo is on my right. Note that I have my brown hair up here. Before I would grade, that's the great Francis Brune, who John Ringling North introduced as the world's greatest juggler.
And probably, I think arguably even today, when you talk to young jugglers, they still look to him as being an inspiration. How did you get this man who should have been retired at that time to come on to the Big Apple Circus?
Yeah, I met him in Paris. He was working at the time at the Lido in Paris. And I know it was, Philippe Petit introduced me to him.
Philippe Petit, of course, the wire walker that walked between the World Trade Center buildings in the 1970s.
He introduced me to Francis. The great story about him was Jimmy Tinsman, who I don't know if he's on this call or not, but Jimmy Tinsman worked very hard on a trick where he would roll a ball up the back of his legs until it hit the top of his feet in a handstand. Well, this was a very difficult idea. And he worked at it day in and day out and day in and day out. And you knew if we weren't performing, Jimmy would be in the backyard trying to do this impossible trick. And then one day he rolled the ball up and it sat on the top of his feet and he was screaming, I did it, I did it, I did it, I did it. And Francis walked up and said, yeah, but can you do it at 8:20 every night? So that he was truly, all-time great. And the guy on the other side is Serge Percelli, who was from a Belgian family. His father was a great white clown in Europe.
White-faced clown, yeah.
White-faced clown, that's correct. And Serge was a tennis racket juggler. I'll recall that Dustin Hoffman brought John McEnroe to see him juggle the tennis rackets.
Before we go on, and we've got a few more pictures here, everybody wanted to come to the Big Apple Circus. I mean, from Paul Newman to Tom Cruise. I mean, it was the place. I think you might even have a list there of some of the.
I do. I
so drop a few names, Mr. Paul.
Here we go. Are you ready? Kirsten Dunst, Margaret Whiting, Martin Scorsese, Emmett Thompson, Geraldo Rivera. These are very Tammy Grimes, Candice Bergen, Harvey Keitel, and so on and so on. And they all came. By the way, the most effective disguise the celebrity could wear would just be a simple baseball cap. Nobody would recognize the celebrity so long as they wore a baseball cap.
So Richie Guyona told me a story one time about Tom Cruise had been at the show, and afterwards he wanted to come up. I mean, he's in his street clothes, and he wants to take a couple of swings on the trapeze. Do you remember that night?
I remember, absolutely. Richie, are you on there somewhere?
I don't know if he is or not, but
yeah. Anyway, he did. He went up to the pedestal and he actually took some swings.
This is after the show had ended, but
yes, right. The big issue was getting him down. I mean, he had to land in the net. This is Candice
Bergen. There she is.
Bergen, and
Murphy Brown was probably one of the most popular shows on television when that photo was taken.
And she was amazing, Candice. Candice, of course, was the daughter of the great ventriloquist Edgar Bergen.
Yep.
And I hate to say it, but when I once asked her about her father, she said, I hate my father, just like that. I was like, whoa, okay. Anyway, she came each year with the great French film director, Louis Malle, who loved the circus.
Her husband.
Yeah, she was married to him. And he passed away at a fairly young age, and yet she came to the circus that year, a few weeks after he had passed. And I said to her, Candice was surprised to see you here this year. And she said, Louis would have wanted me here. And that was so touching, amazing. But that's
just dropping a couple other names here, both Heidi and Vanessa, reminding you of Mary Tyler Moore, Larry Hagman, Christopher Reeve, Robert De Niro. They all made it to the Big Apple.
They all came.
But they probably didn't visit it in Queens. This is Queens, right?
This photograph is Queens. And you can see the line of people that lined up to go in. This was amazing, Queens, because nobody bought advance tickets in Queens. We didn't know why, truthfully, but they lined up for, all the way back and up on a hill behind, and this is the front of the tent, and they paid cash. I never understood the transaction that way, but they filled the tent every year. But this is
so let's talk about the tent for a little bit here. This type of tent, which is now very common, in the United States, was still unusual when you started it in the 1970s. Where did the tent come from? How frequently did you change out the tent, which was made of vinyl, the seats, things like that? PVC,
polyvinyl chloride, and it was a sandwich of two layers of PVC and there'd be a net fabric in between the two layers. So I mean, it was a chemical construction. This was a Nobio tent. Nobio was a chapiteau maker in Milano, near Milano, Italian, and it was a classic Italian tent. Yeah, Harrison Ford. Yes, Vanessa.
So and then Linda says summer tent, winter tent. I mean, I know that
yes, this was the summer tent. It was a white top to reflect the sun so that the sun wouldn't be absorbed. We had one exactly the same, but it was blue, which we used in the winter to keep.
And that was heated too.
Yeah, that was heated. which was
From
also,
roughly Columbus Day through the end of the year, you were located there at
well, even longer
Lincoln
than
Center.
the end. This is Michael Bloomberg, who, as you note, I was pointing out the microphone to. This is what you talk into, Mayor Bloomberg.
And of course, this
But
was long before he became mayor of New York. He was a supporter, as was Donald Trump, who paid for one of the tents one year.
do I have to
He
say
was
that?
doing a lot of things.
He didn't give enough money.
You told me you thought he could have probably coughed up a few more dollars for that.
Well,
tent.
I think he could have coughed up about 4 times what he put up to get his name on it. But life goes on. This is
So tell us
this
about the relationship with Paul Newman, because
well, Newman's Own, as many of you know, you see it right on. This is a popcorn box, all profits to charity. Newman's Own gave all the profits of that company to charity, to various charities they supported. And this is a popcorn box. We would receive from Newman's Own 50-pound bags of popcorn. So we never paid for those. Those were gifts. The price of the cost to the Big Apple Circus of its popcorn was the cost of the box. So we did very well on that. That was, that was a good.
very generous of Paul
Yeah.
Newman. And here we see.
Here I am. Well, I still have brown hair, and I'm shaking hands with none other than Bill Buckles Woodcock.
And there's Fred Finning in the background there.
Fred Finning is the other fellow standing there scratching his head. So, but that was quite extraordinary. And this is
Shelburne, Vermont.
That's where this is. This is Shelburne. You can the hills up behind us, the Shelburne Hills. They quite gorgeous. It was a gorgeous location to bring the Big Apple Circus every year. The only problem, by the way, was that the lot was on a whatever you call that, raked surface. So we had to build up one end of the tent every year in order to put it up there. But it was an enormous success there, and truly the most beautiful location we could go.
And if you haven't been to Shelburne, there's a circus museum located there also.
Yeah, wonderful museum. Wonderful.
Meredith Vieira, probably about the time that she was hosting the Today Show.
Yeah. Yep. By then, you can see I already had my gray hair. So, but she was a wonderful guest, and by the way, appeared in the ring a couple of times in clown costume, clown makeup, and she was a lovely clown. So
yeah, just an all-around good nature. Oh, there's quite a crowd there.
Yeah, the guy on
not only
the
Bello, Kevin Bernardos.
Kevin Bernardos, Guillaume Dufresnoy, Bello Knock, and Michael Christensen, who's with the dark glasses, who was my longtime performance partner, juggling partner. That's at Lincoln Center. I guess they were doing some construction that year, as you can see behind us. But Bello that day did an inclined walk from the New York State Theater all the way up to the top of the I'm blanking on the name of the other theater, but it was an incline wire walk. He was fabulous promoter of Bello.
He always made the headlines no matter where he
Yeah.
goes.
I had the great fun. Oh, look at there. Wait,
that looks like that must be, let me guess here, that is the Bronx.
That's right. This is Van Cortlandt Park in the Bronx. The blue tent is the front end. That's the entrance way. And the little white characters in the various sides are cricket players.
Yeah, I was going to say, those are cricket fields there. They must not have appreciated the circus setting up where they played the cricket.
They certainly did not. But as we did in all places that we brought it, we would make sure that the locals got tickets to the show and could be, we'd serve their needs as well. There was a golf course literally about 300 yards to what would be the left of the big top there. So I could fall out of bed in the morning and go play a round of golf at Van Cortlandt Park. Yeah.
Paul, you've got a lot of friends on this call, right? I think that's the last photograph we've got. I want to thank Paul Guthel also again for those photos. Paul does a fabulous job still taking photographs all over, especially the New York City area whenever a circus is in town. Thank you, my friend, for joining us and for giving us those photos. We've got some people that want to talk to you, maybe take you on a trip down memory lane a little bit. I'm going to start off with Heidi Harriet. So Heidi, I hear you have a story about Paul or for Paul, for us.
So many, but I'll try to be brief. I am a Harriet. Um, by the way, an announcement, Paul, that was legendary was in the Bronx. It was ridiculously hot. Ben Williams was doing the anime act with his little loincloth, and it was like a heat wave. And he said, "It might be hot outside, but it's about to get hotter." Ben
Oh yeah,
Williams, anime. You
that
remember
was the announcement, ladies and gentlemen. It's 104 degrees out there. It's hot, but it's about to get hotter
hotter.
because
Little
here comes
something for the
Ben Williams.
mommies.
That was a whole other thing. But anyway,
Also,
yeah, Heidi, that
don't
was
forget,
great. That was great. Yeah.
we played Hartford, Connecticut. We were the first circus in under canvas, well, under vinyl, since the fire. And
That
I
is
remember
correct.
the fire truck circling the tent while we were there. It was crazy. Remember that, Paul? They had a
I do.
perimeter around the entire tent. It was very cool to be there, though.
But the thing that was disrupting was the advanced news reel was always of the fire,
The fire,
of the Great Ringling Fire. Well, that didn't exactly encourage the audience to come. So
Right.
And
it was-
lastly,
yeah.
last little story is just remembering a fun time, you and Rob Libet and I at like a Dunkin' Donuts or something. You had hired James Zoppi and we were brainstorming over coffee about the Degas, Toulouse-Lautrec ballerina and jockey number. And I just have such wonderful memories of you and he and I sitting there and talking about how it was all going to go, and it ended up being just spectacular.
Yeah, it was.
You know?
We did a show based on Degas ballerinas and Toulouse-Lautrec's jockeys, and it was a beautiful show, absolutely beautiful show.
So you had these themes, that's something else that I think is notable for the Big Apple Circus is that you would have a theme and a real theme.
Yeah.
How long ahead of time did you start preparing for those?
I would say about a year and a half before the first rehearsals. And often sometimes the idea came from acts that I had seen, and other times the idea came first and the acts follows. We filled the slots, but it's important to say there were themes, not narratives, not stories, but yeah.
But and Vanessa, I'm going to bring you into this conversation here a little bit too. So the 1001 Nights, I don't know if that was the first theme show that you did. You're still muted there, Vanessa. I don't know if you can unmute. But that was one where you had, this whole, you had a contortionist who was in a bottle. You had like a genie. You had acrobats who were from the Middle East. And you also had Vanessa, and I'm going to have Vanessa, Paul, tell us about her experience as the girl in 1001 Nights.
Hi,
Take it away.
Mr. Paul.
Hello,
Hi, everybody.
Seth. How you doing?
Hi, Harry. Hi, Heidi. So the intro to that is that I was a company member. So the ideas for the show would come up, and my conversation usually with Paul was he'd come and say, I need you to try and do this. Can you do it? And I'd say, how many months do I have? And he'd say 3 or 6, and I go, okay, I'll try that. Okay. So I was that circus girl that would be trying anything, basically. So they came and they said to me, I need you to learn how to belly dance on the elephant. And that was actually one discipline that I had never trained in, was belly dancing.
And I have to just stop you for a second. Vanessa is a trained ballerina. She, when it comes to dance, she knows dance, but not belly dance.
But not belly dancing. So I'm in New York City. I go to a belly dancing studio, and the first thing the woman says to me is that, well, you need to come back when you get a belly because you don't have the physique, the belly dance. Your muscles are so tight. So
yeah, she had
I went back and they were like, yeah, okay, right.
Yeah.
So I ended up being partnered with the wonderful anime. And I belly danced on the elephant a little bit, but I belly danced with the Moroccan troupe first. And it was pretty amazing. I didn't believe that the audience, but as Paul said, you got to watch your audience, you know your audience. And I would come in and I danced and I put my hand in the loop. I spun up all the way to the top of the tent. Everybody's looking at me, and voila, anime just appears out of nowhere. The whole audience goes, "Oh my God."
Nobody saw the elephant coming into the ring. We're talking about a 8,000-pound animal walking in right to the center, and all eyes were on Vanessa Thomas. at
And
the
then I
top of the
came
tent.
spinning down and landed on this elephant, and the audience's reaction was just amazing.
Yeah,
I
they
don't even
gasped.
have a bigger word for that. They gasped.
And that was just one part of 1001 Nights, one of those themed shows. I
Mhm.
want to bring Brian Velasquez onto the call here. If you can open up your mic, Brian. I know you have a great affinity for the circus, and I think you have a question for Paul.
Hi guys, good evening everybody. Brian Velasquez from New York. So before I get to my question, which I typed in, I want to share a little backstory about Circus of the Senses. And this is a program where, thank you, Mr. Paul, for including us blind and visually impaired children in the world of the circus. I loved the audio description, was amazing. But there was one year in particular that screams out at me. It was 2001. They had the show at Lincoln Center, and it was after 9/11. And just walking into the tent, smelling the popcorn, and just with the show beginning, it was a sense of normalcy for all of us. And it reminded us that life goes on and excitement, there's still happiness in the midst of darkness and tragedy. So, but my question to you is what was your most memorable Big Apple moment in your 31 years with
Oh,
the Big
come
Apple
on.
Great
Circus?
question.
Impossible question. It's kind of like asking a grandparent which was their favorite grandchildren when the families gathered. But no, it was one wonderful moment after the next, and one challenge after the next. We never quite knew what to expect, what would happen next. Live entertainment. That's what we're talking about, and with live audiences, and it was an entire time. It was a great adventure. It never stopped being a great adventure. And Vanessa, you were a wonderful belly dancer.
That was one of those moments, right?
Oh, without a doubt.
One of the things that I think,
Thank you, Brian. But go ahead, Chris. Sorry.
those of us who study the circus and the logistics of the circus realize that something like this, the performance is the performance, the business is the business aspect, but the logistics of traveling a circus. Gail Mitchell, if you could open up your mic, I understand you have a question for Mr. Paul.
I looking at the Bronx setup, Paul, Mr. Paul.
Yeah, hi, nice to see you. Yes,
Where do
go
you
ahead.
put all those vehicles when the
Oh, that's a good question. I'm trying to remember actually where we did park.
like in the
We
city?
in the Bronx, each lot that we went to, there was always a place nearby reserved for our big trucks to be parked during the time we were performing. Sometimes it was the back, like in Queens, it was a back the supply area in Cunningham Park. In the Bronx, I'm trying to remember where all the vehicles went. I don't recall.
I'm thinking about Battery Park and Lincoln Center.
Lincoln Center, yeah. Over
Lincoln
on the west
Center-
side there, off of 10th Avenue, right?
Yeah. That's where they were. They were parking lots and piers on the west side along the Hudson River, and we would bring the trailers and tractor units there and deposit them there for the time. But it was always a problem. It was always part of the logistics of what we had to do.
So Paul,
Sometimes, Chris, we would bring them up to Walden, New York, and deposit. Right, Vanessa? You recall
Yeah.
that? Yeah.
That's what I was getting ready to say. At Lincoln Center, they would bring the trucks in and drop whatever they need to have done, and then they could take them back up to Walden.
I think
And
when
they
you
would
were in
stay there.
Philadelphia, same thing in Philadelphia when you were at the Oval there in front of the Philadelphia Art Museum.
Correct.
But Paul, I'm gonna kind of put you on the spot a little bit and see if you can remember this story, or if you even want to tell this story. So when you were in Chicago, I know that you and Barry Lubin pulled a little caper at
Yeah,
Soldier Field. Tell us
yeah,
about how that all came about and
we
how that
did.
all ended.
The we were on Soldier Field parking lot, which was along Lake Michigan, and I don't whoever administered the parking lot made it clear that we couldn't drain our water onto the ground there. There were
And
two
by the way,
kinds of water.
I'm just going to interrupt you for a second here. As a former resident of Chicago, a lot of people know about the reputation that Chicago has for basically you have to grease some palms to get things done. And that was not something that the Big Apple Circus ever did. You were like Santa Claus. I remember you telling me one time.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I will also tell you this, that when you set up there at Soldier Field and the building inspectors came by to check those seats out, it took like 45 minutes before you could start that first performance because they thought they were going to get a payoff and they did not. So anyway,
They did
that
not.
just,
We never paid off. But anyway,
so now they don't want you to dump
there
the
were
water.
two kinds of drain water from RVs, which is what we lived in. There was what do they call it?
Brown water,
Groundwater or no, black
Gray water.
water. Black water and gray
Gray
water.
gray
water.
water. Yeah, gray water.
Gray water was soapy water, water that went down your shower drain. And you could release that water without releasing the black water, which was the toilets and so on. And we were told we couldn't release any water onto the ground there. By the way, it was, concrete parking lot. And Barry Lubin and I dressed up in our Batman and Reuben, we called it, not Robin, capes, which were towels, beach towels, wrapped and tied around our necks, and went walking around the lot pulling the gray water tanks so that the water would drain out. And you could hear the people in the trailers going, "What was that? It sounded like the water coming out of the trailer, Harriet, or George, or whatever." But it was. But we were like,
The Cape Crusaders.
Yeah, we were the Cape Crusaders.
Batman and Reuben.
Batman and Reuben. It was fun. It was fun. Like so much of what we did was having a good time with each other and the other people. It was always an adventure and fun, and we wanted it that way. It made our lives, it really enhanced our lives. So no problem. Loved it.
Mr. Paul, we've been going for about an hour now, and I know that people have other things that they're going to be celebrating on World Circus Day. This is being World Circus Day, and there's so many activities planned. But I did want to kind of talk to you a little bit about when you decided to exit, when you decided to make the decision to leave your baby, basically. How did you do that? And what are you doing now?
Well, okay. That decision was an easy one. I was 5 years beyond exhaustion by the time I decided I got to step out of this. This is too much. I can't handle it. All the driving, all the overnights, all the midnight to 4 a.m. drives, pulling 42-foot travel trailers and so on. It had to come to an end. I was. Do you remember? I don't know. Those of you who participated in Big Apple Circus, we had an act called Johnny Martin, who had a dog that did nothing, and he would ask her to jump. Say again.
She didn't do it.
That's right. He would hold up the hoop, and he'd say to her, "Lady." He was French, by the way. Jean Martin was his real name, but he was known as Johnny Martin. "Lady," he would say, "Jump," and she would lie down on the ground, and he'd look at the audience and say, "She didn't do it," and so on and so on and so on. When he finally couldn't get her to do something, he looked at her one time and he said, "She is exhausted." And then he put the hoop behind his back and pointed to her. She walked around behind him and jumped through the hoop, of course. Anyway, I was exhausted. I had nothing left in the tank by that time. I don't even remember the year. I think it was 2009, perhaps.
Yeah, six.
Yeah,
Seven,
way beyond having energy to do it any longer. And we went through the recession, the big recession of 2008, 2009, where the funding dried up. People weren't contributing anymore. They weren't buying tickets anymore. And it was time to hang it up. And so I did it. I regretted having to do it, but I did it because I had to. And I moved on. I've been teaching courses down here where I live. I live now in Sarasota, Florida. I teach at the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, where the students in my class are older than I am, which is a miracle. And it's fun doing it. It's always enlightening. I'm trying to think. I've worked several times at the Ringling Museum of Art, which is a spectacular place. Some of the great artwork. I can go on and on and on. And life is full. I have a beautiful little pool in my backyard, swimming pool, and a 2-year, 3-month-old baby boy who calls me Papa. And every day,
Grandchild, not your baby.
oh no, grandchild. Sorry about that, grandchild. And he calls me Papa, which is Papa, and he says Papa pool, and then he wants to come over and swim in Papa's pool. So life is delightful. That's what I have to say.
Great. Heidi, did you have something you wanted to add?
He
No,
did
I
the
don't-
cabarets, Paul.
Cabarets?
Oh, I've done cabarets. That's right, both in New York and down here. Heidi, you were at one of the ones at the Show Folks Club, or the
Yes,
one I
that's
did at the Show Folks Club here in Sarasota. A
So
cabaret.
Paul, you go to circuses still. You go to Circus Sarasota. You were at the Sailor Circus the other night. So when you look at the circus today, what's the future like?
Oh my, it's hard to predict because the kids are so addicted to screens. So there's very little live entertainment in their lives, and I don't have an answer where it's headed. There are numerous circuses still in existence, traveling, small ones, traveling in this country, and I'm not sure where it's going or where it's headed. Anybody else wants to volunteer an idea, by all means. So, Linda, you
Well-
have a beautiful dog.
I will tell you this, Paul.
Thank you. Can I just interrupt for 1 second?
Sure.
Paul, it's very good to see you. I was honored to serve on the board for many, many years. And hi, Paul, other Paul photographer. Love you guys so much. Thank
Linda
you.
was on our board of directors all those years. So,
Thank you. It was an
my
honor.
pleasure. The honor was ours.
So I did want to tell you, because this is an event that's being held by the Circus Historical Society. Many of you who are on this call are members of the Circus Historical Society already. I would encourage all of you to consider membership because you love the circus. That's why you're here, right? But I also want to tell you that our friend Paul, Mr. Paul, is going to be one of the speakers at the Circus Historical Society Convention, which is going to be held July 24th through the 26th in Bridgeport, Connecticut. So if you want to kind of question Paul a little bit more, talk to Bruce Hawley and some of the others who are on this call, we would welcome that, and we would welcome your membership in the Circus Historical Society. It's circushistory.org is the website, circushistory.org. Paul,
Chris,
final thoughts?
Yeah, it's been a great pleasure, gabbing about all this and having you kind of lead me through it, and Bruce as well. It's an amazing group, the Circus Historical Society, based in Bridgeport, Connecticut, birthplace and home of P.T. Barnum. And the Barnum Museum is there, and it's quite extraordinary. So this has been a lot of fun.
Well, thank you. I know it's been a lot of fun for us too. Bruce, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank everyone for joining in, and we couldn't have celebrated World Circus Day any better. Paul, it was an honor to have you, and Chris did a great job. And please, again, if you're interested, join the Circus Historical Society, and please come see us at the convention in July.
And thanks again to Paul Guthel for the photographs we looked at. Aileen Barney, who kind of set up a lot of the recording of this. It'll be posted on YouTube soon. We'll send you a link and you can watch it all over again. So, thank you,
Good night,
folks, and we'll
everyone.
see you down the
Thank
road.
you.
Do
It
well,
was
everybody.
fabulous.